Your child looks ADHD in class, but at home you see constant meltdowns, difficulties going to sleep, difficulty calming themselves down, needing constant stimulation. They might have done well on standardized tests. They might do well in small settings. They were probably diagnosed with ADHD by their pediatrician or maybe by a previous therapist. However, I'm going to go over 5 signs that it's actually anxiety and not ADHD. Stick around to find out more. I'm Dr. Andrew Lima. I'm a licensed child psychologist. I specialize in working with kids and adults who have tried traditional treatments and have failed. My specialty niche is using technological treatments to help retrain and rewire the brain. And I want to tell you about some of the most common things that I see in my practice and how easy it is to mistake what I call anxiety-driven inattention for actual ADHD. Sign 1 is context swings. ADHD tends to be very steady. It's also characterized in the DSM-5 as a neurodevelopmental disorder. That means that it began early in childhood. There maybe was some developmental issue that happened at some point in the child's life, whereas anxiety problems tend to spike with stress, noise, and distractors in the environment. The biggest difference between anxiety-driven inattention and ADHD is that ADHD is very steady across the board, whereas anxiety-driven inattention tends to wax and wane with the environment. So think about when the child's stress levels are high, their attention tends to tank. When there's noise on the bus, cafeteria, or in the classroom, their attention tanks. And if the child feels stressed during transitions, like between activities, between classes, between homes, if the parents are separated, their attention tends to be impacted as well. Sign 2 is in the body. You might see your child having difficulty with sleep, whether that be initiating sleep or having lots of nighttime wakenings. They might have nighttime enuresis, which is where they wet the bed after they've been fully potty trained. And you might see their heart racing and sweaty palms and tight muscles in between transitions and in stressful periods as well. You might also see tics worsening during stress. Sign 3 is that testing actually looks okay. So if the child does well academically, and if they've done well on psychological or neuropsychological testing in terms of attention and executive functioning and memory, chances are it's actually not ADHD, but it's anxiety. One thing you got to think about psychological testing is it's done in perfect circumstances. So when I test a child in my office, the environment is calm, it's quiet, there are no distractors. And if the child is able to do really well in that environment, that's different. And they usually do well in tests at school. Typically, a kid with ADHD will struggle all across the board. Let's talk about a real example of how this plays out. I'm going to talk to you about a real case, patient that I worked with, and it's all been de-identified, so there's no identifying features. But this case that I'm going to illustrate for you is probably about 75 to 80% of the cases that I see in my office. So this is a 12-year-old girl that came to me with difficulty focusing. She seemed kind of anxious and tense, but her pediatrician had diagnosed her with ADHD. The parents tried her on 3 different medications for ADHD. First, she tried Adderall, then she tried Concerta, then they tried atomoxetine or Strattera. The child actually got worse on all of these medications. That's another really common sign that it's actually not ADHD. The parents also were seeing a talk therapist for 2 years of weekly cognitive behavioral therapy. It made no difference. The girl was frustrated and the family was frustrated because she was bright and academically was doing well. She just had to work like 5 times harder than her other peers in order to just keep up. And it didn't make sense. She scored high on the Vanderbilts, which is the pediatrician-administered ADHD rating scale. When the family came to me, and most of the patients that I tend to get in my office are ones who have kind of failed or not done well on traditional treatments, the first thing I wanted to do was do a thorough evaluation of her. So I did a qEEG brain map and I did the CNS vital signs, which is a cognitive screening test that gives me a good idea as to what's happening with the child's attention and executive functions objectively. First off, here's her initial brain map. I'm not going to go over in great depth on how to read a brain map. I'm going to do some separate content on that. But essentially what you see here is a statistical view of the child's brainwave frequencies compared to other children her age. So whenever there's green activity in the brain maps, that means good. She's in the normal range compared to other people her age. When anything is in the blue range, that means it's too low. She's producing less of those frequencies compared to other people her age. And when anything is in shades of orange to red, that means she's producing 2 to 3 times too much of that activity compared to other brains her age. So what we saw on her brain map was way too much red in the front of the brain in beta and high beta. Beta and high beta are our fast-moving frequencies in the brain. We need to produce appropriate amounts of beta and high beta to be able to focus and direct our attention. But when somebody's producing way too much of it, it's like an engine that's just revving hot all the time. That engine is going to burn through a lot of fuel very quickly. And that's most of what I see in my office. That's also why when you put someone like this on stimulant medication, they get a lot worse. We have to remember why stimulants are used for ADHD. The reason why stimulants are given to children with ADHD is because traditionally ADHD is a disorder of the brain having difficulty turning on. So you give a brain that has difficulty turning on a stimulant medication that revs up the amount of norepinephrine and dopamine, or the excitatory neurotransmitters in the brain. When you give that brain a stimulant, it now can turn on like a light switch and be able to focus and calm down. The reason why so many people fail stimulant medications or actually get worse on them is because they may look like they have difficulty focusing and attending to tasks, but their brains are not actually turned off. Their brains are actually revving up too high. So you take a brain that's revving up really high, give them a stimulant, and it's like throwing kerosene on a fire. Things are just going to get worse, or it's not going to have the desirable outcome. Nothing against pediatricians or psychiatrists who don't do this type of testing. This has not become standard practice yet to do qEEG brain mapping on every person seeking medication or every person diagnosed with ADHD. But for those who are fortunate enough to be able to undergo that testing, you get a much more rich picture of the brain than you do with just traditional checklist-like assessments. Getting back to our patient, her brain map told us that she actually doesn't have ADHD. So her cognitive scores were really solid on the CNS vital signs, like you can see here. And her brain map data told her that she was over-aroused, that her brain was producing way too much fast brainwave activity, and that's why she was having trouble sleeping, why she was anxious and tense, and why she was having difficulty attending to tasks like she should be able to. So what we did was 15 sessions of neurofeedback therapy where we trained her brain to produce more activity associated with being calm and focused, and we told her brain, hey, stop producing all that fast stuff. That's not efficient, and that's actually what's making your problem worse. So basically what we do that is the person sits there watching a show while they're connected to electrodes, and that show only plays nice and bright when their brainwaves are showing the right activity, and starts to dim out or shut off as soon as their brain starts producing all that unwanted fast brainwave activity. By doing that, the person learns pretty quickly how to regulate their brainwave activity, which we normally have no conscious awareness of, and over time, the brain starts to change itself through the process of neuroplasticity. And we know that that's what happens because people start to report improvements in their anxiety, stress, sleep, and attention. And then we objectively can measure improvements on the qEEG brain map and cognitive testing. So here is her repeat brain map that showed all of her frequencies were back in the normal range. Within 15 sessions, we were able to quiet down all that excessive fast brainwave activity through the neurofeedback therapy. And guess what? She no longer met criteria for ADHD. She was now significantly more focused in class. She was able to sleep better on time. And her parents and teachers were all reporting substantial improvements. No medications, no drugs, just using the right type of operant conditioning and the right type of technology to retrain the brain. Now, this isn't a miracle case. This is about 90% of the people that I work with ADHD were able to get these results within 15 to 30 sessions on average. So if a child comes twice a week, we can see huge improvements within 3 months. And that improvement tends to be long lasting once we rewire the brain. People almost never call me back for repeat sessions. Once we've made substantial progress in the brain, it tends to hold and they go on living their best life and can now tap into their best potential. This is what I see time and time again. Anxiety misread as ADHD. Now, the child is having trouble focusing, but that's why I like to call it anxiety-driven inattention and not actual neurodevelopmental ADHD. I think you're getting the point by now. So now here are 5 quick checks you can do to try to spot if your child or if you yourself are dealing with anxiety-driven inattention rather than ADHD. If 3 or more of these tend to be true, start a anxiety calming protocol or reach out to me or leave a comment down below and we can try and talk about other alternatives for helping retrain your brain to get out of that constant fight or flight state and be able to rewire your brain for calm, focused attention. So 1, if sleep latency is more than 30 minutes, or if you find yourself waking up a lot at night, that's a key sign that it's probably anxiety. 2, morning stomach aches or headaches, especially on school days. Interestingly enough, you almost never see these during holidays and weekends. 3, symptoms tend to spike with time or pressure. 4, stimulant medications either made you worse or they didn't help at all. And 5, you're able to do quite well on cognitive testing or academic testing at school. So just to recap, anxiety can look like ADHD, however, they are very different. And for me, the biggest difference is when we take an anxious brain, or we take an over-aroused brain, and we retrain the brain to quiet itself down and to better self-regulate, the person no longer meets criteria for ADHD, because it wasn't ADHD to begin with, and they're able to really calm themselves, quiet their minds down, focus, and tap into their full potential. I see it time and time again. Now, if somebody does have actual ADHD, it usually shows up as the opposite problem, too much slow brainwave content. And that pattern, instead of training the brain to quiet itself down like we do with anxiety-driven inattention, we train the brain to actually rev itself up a little bit more and produce more brainwave activity that's associated with being sharp and focused, aka beta. However, that pattern is becoming more and more rare. I haven't seen it in my practice in quite a while. What I see in my practice day in and day out are children all the way up through adults who've been told they have ADHD, who believe they have ADHD, who met criteria for ADHD based off a checklist. However, they don't actually have ADHD. They have an over-aroused nervous system that needs to learn how to quiet itself down. This isn't anybody's fault either, by the way. We live in an overstimulated society. We're bombarded by screens and technology and noise and stress from our environments. And day in and day out, our nervous systems are struggling to keep up with this. So if you're in the New York or New Jersey area and you want to come into our practice and take a look at your brain, click the link below in our bio or visit centerforcognitivegrowth.com. Otherwise, leave a comment down below if you've been diagnosed with ADHD and you think maybe actually it's anxiety. See you in the next one.